I could not escape the loop. It's hard to sound enthusiastic about it. If someone's like a football player and they're out on the field and they got the shit kicked out of them, they're like, oh, that was a hard game, this, that, the other. I'm like, okay, here's the difference. You had padding. You had a fucking team behind you. And you know what? You had a locker room to go wash off, and you had a home to go to, and you had another game ahead of you. And there were rules. It's everything just the opposite of that. Being an artist and an entrepreneur, it's like financially the worst combination. I was profoundly disconnected from financial success. What I realized is that, as this entrepreneurial story is kind of told, whether they're uncomfortable or not, I feel like I should share the in-between cracks and crevices of the journey, not to prove a point or say somebody needs to have that experience. I wish anybody watching more speed and success than I was able to generate at any one of those points in my life. My experiences were not for anyone else, really. It wouldn't have been the right fit. Sometimes you hear those stories. We worked 7 miles in the snow to get to school. I'm like, whoa, was it a good school? Did you have good friends? Or you only remember the snow? It's a bit like that. I don't want the moments that were hard for me to be what carries the story. It's just some flavoring of what was going on. And at this point, I had moved out of Barrington. My friend Richard had set up a studio for me in the sense of his friend owned many apartment buildings in Hyde Park. And one particular apartment building had a very large basement. Basically, Richard's friend was a wealthy guy. And he said, yeah, you guys can have this studio. Just tell me what you need. And, we needed windows and things like this. But it was a basement. Kind of on one half was the laundry room and storage areas and power. And on this side, it was just an open area, but it was quite long. I don't know, maybe 2,000 square feet. So for me, it was a big basement. Sharp claws. Okay, hello. So I rented a room with her for a little bit. She was a school teacher. And I remember she would call me at the studio. She was very kind. And she'd be like, it's 10 o'clock. Are you coming home? And I'm like, no, I'm doing stuff. And I realized that I was so out of balance with work and things like this that it was happening again. Amy and I were not dating, but we were friends, and I was happy to spend time with her. And I didn't realize I was even disconnecting. So our roommateness wasn't working because I was working more. Why am I renting this room? So I built out the basement, and my buddy Bill came over and we put a shower in. Now, it wasn't legal to live there, so we hid a shower in a closet and ran the pipes around, and you had to step up 2 or 3 feet to get into the shower. And then I put a bedroom in another closet that I built. My bedroom was basically the width of a queen bed, and there was a dresser at the end, and that was it. It was a cell, but I could close the door, and I'm only sleeping in here. I made every space as good as I could. I painted the walls green and the ceiling blue because I wanted a blue sky and green grass. It basically looked like I was living inside of the belly of a Muppet, so it was not a good color choice. I was never good at color. What it meant to me was that I had the freedom, I didn't pay rent, and I had the ability to kind of move my shop in, and I began rebuilding clients. I remember Richard came down one time. Even the refrigerator I got was from this neighborhood where they put all their junk out one time a year. My buddy and I went and picked up this refrigerator. I mean, I was definitely dumpster diving, but I didn't feel like a dumpster diver. I just felt like, oh, I'll use that, and oh, I'll use that. I didn't feel dirty. I didn't feel worthless. I felt my self-esteem was low because I didn't have money and I couldn't have a social life. Richard would check in on me every once in a while, and he's like, yeah, you eating okay? And I'm like, dude, I got nothing. And I opened the refrigerator and there was like a can of tuna in there. He pulls out $100. He's like, go get some groceries. I'm like, that'd be great. Gradually, I began to rebuild the business. That's when I became introduced to some chefs that I started working with. And after 10 years in the basement, I thought it was going to be a smooth transition of business success into a newly purchased building. But what happened is the guy who owned the building was in the hospital critically ill, and his family sold all of his holdings for $100 million or something like that. And so now I was in a building illegally that was owned by a large corporate conglomerate, and they came in and they changed the locks on me, and I was locked out of my studio, and I had to get that sorted out. And then I had nowhere to move my business because at that point I started making products. I had a little bit of money, and I was commuting between Hyde Park and Oak Park, where I had an apartment. I had to put my entire shop, 2,000 square foot. Now that was a tight 2,000 square feet too. That was packed, and I had to jam it all into a 2-bedroom apartment until I could find a building to buy. It's been a journey of extremes, but I think there was something in my mind that always told me it'll be okay tomorrow. And I had this delusional optimism, clearly, that, I could do that. But really I was just working 16 hours a day, every day. Some people say that, but that's my walking in the snow. That is not exaggerating. When they say it takes 10,000 hours to master, I did the hours, and at that point it was several 100,000 hours. I mean, it was nonstop. I'm like, how could it be this many hours? But it was, and I was no wealthier for it. I thought, this blows, Now I was getting older. I wanted to go on dates. I was living on $1,500 a month. I'm like, how are we going to pay the electric bill? And then finally we just decided, I'm like, I can't be focusing on spending less. I have to figure out how to just earn more. We had just published our first book. I thought I'd get rich off of that. I printed 1,500 books, and those books were $100 each. I'm like, 150 grand, we'll be okay. We'll be able to get down payment on the building. I eventually sold all the books, but even after a mention in the New York Times, we sold 8 books in one day. Oh, we were so ecstatic. Can you believe this? This is fantastic.
How long did it take you to sell all the books?
I don't know, 10 years, something like that. It depended on if I was doing classes or workshops and things like that. It's uncomfortable to remember these things, actually, to tell you the truth. There's a part of me that is happy to be past it, and I thought it'd be fun to tell the stories, but these are kind of old wounds because I kept reaching for this brass ring, and it just kept slipping away. And although I had good people in my life, I did not have a defective family, I just kept thinking, how does this get easier? I could not escape the loop. I didn't have the pressure of having children, but I was terrified that I might have a child. Yeah, it makes me feel a little sick to my stomach. It'll pass. It's old stuff. It's hard to sound enthusiastic about it. If someone's like a football player and they're out on the field and they got the shit kicked out of them, they're like, that was a hard game, this, that, the other. I'm like, okay, here's the difference. You had padding. You had a fucking team behind you. And you know what? You had a locker room to go wash off, and you had a home to go to, and you had another game ahead of you, and there were rules. It's everything just the opposite of that. Being an artist and an entrepreneur, it's like financially the worst combination. A car mechanic entrepreneur. There's a lot of broken cars. People need those fixed, but I couldn't find an audience. And I tried to exhibit in galleries, and I made efforts to do that from the Barrington years, and I gave presentations on work, and swing and a miss. I was profoundly disconnected from financial success.